recommendations or requests at the end of my videos. And someone suggested that I make something from the Great British Baking Show. Now, full transparency, despite my subscription to BritBox and my love of British history, I've seen exactly one episode of this show, and that was just a few weeks ago. I know it's one of the kinder, more gentler baking contests out there, but I still find it very stressful. I feel so bad that everyone works so hard and someone still has to go home at the end. But I do recognize that some truly great talents have come from the show. And I'm intrigued by the books that they've put out. So I received a few of their books at Christmas time, and I'm gonna see how well they work for the average American baker. It was really hard for me to pick a recipe to start with. After basically closing my eyes and selecting at random, I'm starting this week with the chocolate raspberry cheesecake brownies from the book A Bake for All Seasons. So come bake with me. As it seems we always do when working with a chocolate recipe, the first thing I'm going to do is chop up my chocolate. To our double boiler. Got our double boiler, got our chocolate, and now I'm going to add in the butter. We're going to melt these things together. We're almost there. I will say the butter would have melted a lot faster if it was at room temperature when I had started. Was it? No, of course not. We're going to let carryover finish off that one little bit and move over to our mixer. So we're going to start with our eggs. Now I will say this when working with a recipe from Britain, I always measure out my ingredients before I start. I don't usually do that when baking, but if I'm working in a recipe that uses measurements, frankly, that aren't cups, I always measure them out so that I don't mess up the math. All right, we're gonna mix our eggs and our sugar. Now it's supposed to be golden sugar, but we don't have golden sugar here in the US. So the closest I could come is Tarbonaro sugar, so that's what I'm using. That looks nice and paler in color, all combined. The Tarbonaro sugar didn't fully melt into the eggs, but that's okay. Now, whoop, almost dropped that. Now I'm gonna add in the chocolate and butter mixture. And and the vanilla paste. Whoops. And the vanilla paste. All right, that's just combined. Now to our dry ingredients. All right, for our dry ingredients, we've got flour, cocoa powder, and a pinch of salt. Now, am I supposed to sift these into this mixing bowl so that it's easier to mix? Absolutely. Obviously, I'm not doing that because, well, that's just another thing to wash. And they're brownies, so they don't have to be perfect. You just have to get them good enough. Get them in the pan. Recipe calls for a 20 by 30 centimeter pan. Look that up, and it's like 11 and a bit by 7 and a bit. That's obviously not something that I have. So, but I do have this pan. It's 11 by 8. So my brownies are just going to be ever so slightly thinner, and that's fine. This is as close as I could get. This dough all the way out to the edges, smooth it out. I did spray and then obviously line this with parchment paper. Fingers crossed, that means it's easier to get out later. And now we go to the oven. While the brownies are baking, we're gonna mix our cheesecake layer. So we're gonna start with some cream cheese. We're gonna beat that with our sugar. That seems well blended, light and fluffy. Add in another teaspoon of vanilla bean paste and eggs. And now our sour cream. That's it for our cream cheese mixture. Now we're going to do the raspberries. This is to mash our raspberries with a fork, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to scoop half of this through a strainer. I'm not sure why only half, but only half. All right, now we're going to mix this together. We're going to set that aside. All right, now we're going to pour our cheesecake layer over our cooled brownies. They're not completely cool. They've only been out of the oven basically for a few minutes. We're going to pour on our raspberries. Sort of randomly. And then it says to use a toothpick, but I'm going to use a knife to kind of swirl all of this stuff together and make a pretty swirly pattern. I like using a knife. I think it's easier to like hold on to. Toothpicks aren't very big. You don't want to over mix. You don't want to, like I kind of over mixed over here. You want more swirly than more mixed together. All right, back into the oven.
Here are my final thoughts. These are really good. The brownie layer is dense and chocolatey, everything I want a brownie to be. Not a cake, not a cookie, but somewhere in between. The cheesecake layer is also very flavorful, and the raspberries provide a very nice tang and complement to the rich chocolatey brownie. But despite baking it a full 15 minutes extra, I couldn't get the cheesecake layer to fully set. Now, it was cooked, but as you can see, it's a little more runny than I would prefer. But if you're into a very gooey brownie, these are for you. A few important metrics. Is this recipe worth making at home? With 1 being Oreos, totally not worth making, and 5 being chocolate chip cookies, totally worth making. I'd say this recipe is a 4. I can see making these again, especially if I had a special occasion for somebody who really liked chocolate and raspberries. Can or should this recipe be made in advance, with 1 being souffle? Absolutely not going to keep well, and 5 being fruitcake will literally keep forever. This recipe is a 4. They were really good the day I baked them, and even better the next day. How hard was this recipe, with 1 being instant pudding and 5 being the multi-layer death by chocolate cake I might make someday? I'd say this recipe is a 3.5. It's not hard per se, but having multiple baking rounds does require you to make sure that you plan to have enough time to bake it on. This is one of those recipes that if you're not paying close attention, it'll seem like it's going to take a lot less time than it actually ends up taking. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I upload a new video every Friday. And hit that like button if you liked it. If you have a recipe you'd like to see me try, please put it in the comments, and I'll see you next week.